Hi everyone. So I want to talk about symbols today. The word symbol means thrown together. I think it comes from the Greek word thrown together, and it points to the fact that the symbol throws together a whole lot, a big story. It's not just a piece of stone or a wooden image or a shell. It throws together a whole story. And that's why we carry symbols around with us and put them in our pockets. When we go to the beach, we pick up a shell and then often put it on our desk. So they're symbols, but they're full of meaning. And why it's come up for me is because this weekend I attended a family wedding. People came from all around the world for this wedding. So there were only 50 people, but it was a very sweet and beautiful wedding in which so much symbolism. The bride dressed in white walked down the aisle towards the man that had asked her for a hand in marriage. And he was standing smiling at watching this beautiful woman walk down the aisle. And then there was the whole ceremony with the priest and the flowers around and people watching, very important, watching. And putting the ring on and all the symbolic symbols of the whole wedding were there. And I had almost tears in my eyes. It was so full of meaning. It wasn't machines walking down. There were no machines there getting married. These were human beings, smiling and full of love in their eyes towards each other. And it just brought up this whole question of symbols. And why it came up for me was because at the wedding table, I happened to be sitting next to a man he was actually from Singapore, but he lived in Australia now. And he was a mathematician. And it reminded me a little bit in my chatting to him, because he was obviously very grounded in mathematics, and he mentioned that his wife sometimes argues with him because she brings up stuff that has got nothing to do with the real world. But it reminded me of many, many years ago when I started what was called the Bioenergy Association. It was a small group of physicists and engineers, and I was the only medical doctor there. But I wanted to try and bring in this whole concept of what is energy in medicine. And so we used to meet once a month and to discuss the whole question of energy. And I can still remember one day when there was this German physicist who was also a mathematician and written a book on maths. And he said to me, Bernard, he said, what you just said is not scientific. And I said to him, Hans, if your relationship with your wife depended on science, you wouldn't be able to have one. You don't walk around your house with a textbook on relationships. You just know from your own self what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is bad and what doesn't work for your wife and what does. You know it from yourself, and you're a subjective being. You're not just a machine. And he looked at me, I can still see that look in his eyes, and said, oh, maybe you're right. So the world, yeah. So one of the challenges I even ask when I teach medical doctors, I ask them which is more real, the subjective world or the objective world. And more than half of them will say the objective world is much more real than the subjective. And yet the fact is that everything that they know of is mainly subjective. Their whole world is subjective. It's all happening inside them, not outside them. The tree out there, as I've many times pointed out, is actually inside you. The photons have to pass through your eyes into your brain interprets it. So our world is not objective in a way. It's much more subjective. We are subjective beings. And that's why symbols are so important to us, and why we constantly fill our house up with symbols. So even men who regard themselves as very grounded and the world is objective and has to be real. The fact is that all of that, the whole world is subjective. That mathematician sitting next to me at that wedding, I mean, he was enthusiastic about his mathematical formulas. Well, his enthusiasm is subjective. His thinking about maths is all subjective, not objective. And yet he denies all the subjectivity and says only the objective world is real. Doesn't make any sense because he's denying himself. He's denying his thinking, his feeling, his emotions. All that is subjective. So we have to be careful how we think about the world around us, because otherwise we miss out. We miss out on a whole component of who we are. We are subjective beings. We have feelings. We have deep knowings. We don't just think. Thinking is a very, very small part of who we are. It's also subjective, by the way. And there's no evidence that it's happening in the brain. In fact, most of the qualities that make us human are not happening inside the body in the way that we think of the body. There's no evidence that our emotions are inside the body. Neurotransmitters, I understand. Chemicals that are there, I understand. But those are the result of our emotions. They're not our emotions. You can't just take those chemistries and inject them into somebody and make the person happy or sad or whatever. It doesn't work like that. So we are subjective beings. And because of that, we need to acknowledge it. We need to recognize that. Because when we recognize that we are subjective beings, then we understand a lot of the things that we do. That mathematician and a lot of these so-called scientists who regard themselves as very, very objective. The fact is that if you went to their house, you'd see all kinds of symbols of meaning for them. Whatever that symbol is, even if it's a picture of their family, the fact is that when they look at that picture of their family, it brings a certain element of joy in them. The joy is subjective. The photograph might be something objective, but it's meaningless if it has no meaning for the person. If it has meaning for the person, then that is subjective. So we need to recognize that we actually, most people don't function as if they're scientists, they function as if they're human beings. And even the scientists keep forgetting that they are human, that they have all kinds of subjective components that are there that can't be measured by science. And it doesn't look like it could ever be measured by science because it's dealing with flowing systems. It's dealing with much closer to quantum science and Newtonian science. So, yeah, and the other big one is, of course, the placebo. That even people that don't believe in placebos still respond to the placebo because the doctor's giving it to them. So the whole relationship with the medical, profession is there's a lot of symbolism around it. The surgery, the white coat, the stethoscope, all that are so symbols. And those symbols have a profound effect on every human being. So we need to just acknowledge it and recognize it and enjoy the symbolism of life that we have, because it makes the world fun. It makes the world real in a way that we don't really understand even. So find a symbol, look around you, you'll find lots of symbols there, and start to enjoy it fully without your thinking mind saying, oh, it's not real. Thinking is only a small part of who you are. Open your heart to the world. Have a good day.